Alrighty, guys, looks like we have a good crowd going. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in. My name is Allie. I'm going to be your host for today's webinar. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We have TextUs and LaborEdge here today. We're going to take a deep dive into SMS insights and best practices. I'm going to go over a couple of things before we get started. So follow me. For our agenda today, we're going to go over intros, a little bit of housekeeping for today's webinar. I'm going to go over TextUs and LaborEdge partnership, and then I'm going to hand it over to Martin and Michael to talk about 2023 micro trends and year in review, digging into the data, and then we do have time set aside for a Q&A. A couple of housekeeping things, just to let you guys know, we are recording this webinar. It will be sent out to everyone that attended after the webinar has been completed. If you do have questions, please feel free to ask them at any time. This webinar is going to be very conversational. Just pop that question into the Q&A spot down below. You'll see you have a little Q&A button. If you open that up and pop that question in, we will get answers to you. Alrighty, guys, a little quick introduction. I have Martin and Michael from TextUs today. And like I said, my name is Allie. I am from LaborEdge, and we will be your speakers for today's webinar. Alrighty, just a quick little overview of LaborEdge. If you guys do not know, LaborEdge Nexus powered by LaborEdge is technology that brings hospitals, staffing agencies, and healthcare workers together, adding value to the healthcare ecosystem. We at LaborEdge have focused on partners that bring worth to agencies across the board, like TextUs. A little bit about the TextUs and LaborEdge partnership. TextUs was one of our first partners. And since our partnership, millions of text messages have been journaled into LaborEdge's Nexus. I can attest to a couple thousand of those text messages, as I was a user of TextUs before joining the LaborEdge team. Healthcare text messages sent with TextUs in 2022 hit 4.5 million. That is a ton of text messages going out to candidates throughout the nation. TextUs reaches hundreds of candidates with text blasting. It's super simple. You can schedule specific messages to candidates, whether it's their birthday, you're checking in after a long shift. It's something you just don't have to think about. The integration is also very simple and very efficient. If you see on this slide, this is a screenshot of Nexus itself. You can see that Chrome extension for TextUs. Anywhere within Nexus, you have this extension. You can pop it open, message an active candidate. You can even pop open that side extension for TextUs, and it will discover phone numbers that are on the screen. You're not having to manually upload those phone numbers. TextUs does the discovering for you with the phone number and the first and last name from that screen. Like I said, super efficient and super simple, something to just get you into the day and send out those messages without having to think about getting data into your texting platform. And now I'm going to kick it off to Martin and Michael.
Thanks, Allie.
Of course.
So a little bit about TextUs before we get into the meat of the presentation here. And just to reiterate, please ask questions as we go. I'm Martin. Mike's my partner in crime. It helps us, I think, keep things moving and more interesting with more engagement. So we'd encourage you to do so. So the mission of TextUs is we allow businesses to have high quality conversations and more of them, frankly, so that you can get in touch and have conversations with more candidates and employees, resulting in improved sourcing and just overall higher engagement. So Mike's going to talk in a couple of slides about why this is the case, but fundamentally, SMS is just a more advantaged communication channel. And TextUs adds a layer of strategy on top of that. We do SMS all day long. It's all we do. And we have deep expertise in this area in terms of things that get you higher deliverability and higher response rates, which we'll talk about a bit later. We're just also huge believers in transparency and just empowering our employees to do their best work. And so that's how you as our customers get more bang for the buck, is we're enabling our employees to do their best. And really the other way too is we reward our stakeholders just by we try to be as on the ball as possible in terms of operations and financial performance.
Yeah, and so to touch a little bit on just texting macro trends that we're seeing in the market, we have a couple of different slides within this presentation that kind of hit at this, but texting is kind of the way to go in 2023, right? Every metric and piece of data that we see kind of backs this up. So texting volume is 11% of email right now, and there's much less spam currently. So there's a ton of room to grow, and we're kind of seeing it like a scale a little bit. As more and more texts come, I think we'll start to see an evening out between text and email because of the amount of spam that's being blocked with texting through things like 10DLC that just cannot be hindered, or emails are still just getting through with a ton of spam. So we're seeing in almost every way texting superior. So SMS is a live medium. 74% of consumers prefer talking to a real person. 98% of SMS messages are read, whereas only 20% of emails are read. And on average, it takes minutes to respond to a text, which I'm sure everybody can attest to, whereas it's hours or days for an email. Yeah.
So to dive deeper into adoption trends and best practices, we do at least an annual survey across our install base. And so we had about 250 customers participate in the survey across 10 different verticals and industries. We do quite a bit of work in what I'll call the recruiting and workforce management use case. That's a lot in staffing and the talent acquisition and workforce management arms of these other verticals. We also do a lot of use cases and serve a lot of folks just in pure sales and marketing roles that are trying to promote and sell a product or a service to consumers. So it's a broad base of research that we do. We are heavily invested in just staying in touch with our customers and just getting the best insights that we can to use internally. And we take those insights and share them with you as well. It's just part of our dedication to just trying to be the foremost experts in really the application of SMS. And then we also look at our own data across various industries to supplement this primary research that we did with these 250 customers.
Yeah, and so looking back at 2022 and kind of just the overall trends that we're seeing with SMS, the market was valued at like $5 billion in 2020 and is on its way to be a $24 billion industry in 2028. So that's basically a 20% growth rate year over year from 2022 to 2028. In TextUs, we're seeing even double that if you look at the past couple of years. So, all to say is that texting is growing and it's here to stay for, especially in healthcare recruiting that we're seeing.
So this is a really good slide to talk about is one of the first slides coming out of the survey that we did. So we asked our respondents, what is the most effective communication channel for your business? And it's really no surprise if you go back to the slide that Mike talked about, the fundamental advantages that SMS has, the higher read rate, the higher response rate, it's really no surprise that most of the folks in the surveys cited texting is the most effective communication channel. At about 50%, phone was at about 30%, and emails at about 17%. I think the more relevant question is, what does this mean for you? Does it mean you should only use texting? No. What it means is texting really becomes the foundation and probably the most common form of outreach that you have to either your candidates or your employees. But then it's also supplemented by phone and email. So it's not a one size fits all. I think the trick here is to make texting really the backbone or the foundation, but at the right points in time in the the candidate or the employee journey, reach out via phone and email as well to really complement what you do with texting. And when you combine all those together, you just become you get more engaged candidates, you get more engaged employees, and that's really when the magic happens in terms of larger pipeline, more effective sourcing, higher placement rates, et cetera.
Yeah, and I like this slide a lot because when you compare those familiar with email open and response rates, really can see how much of a jump these response rates are for texting. And I'm sure Ali can attest. We were talking a little bit before the webinar on just how effective texting is in the recruiting space. But we're seeing an average response rate of 67%. And then we see, mass campaigns, so those text blasts having a 34% response rate. So, as a marketer, that really sticks out because a good response rate for an email campaign nowadays is 0.5%, 1% maybe. So these numbers, when you really put it against email, they become all the more stark and impressive.
And I should have covered this when I talked about TextUs. We cover both the broadcast, so one-to-many, also known as just blasting and getting the word out there. But we also do the conversational, and so our data set really covers both use cases. And so that's just to reiterate the point that Mike made, that really, if you want to see the high engagement rates that you do, you really have to use the right blend of both to get a response rate that's overall, pretty high that you see there. So if we look at response rate by industry, there is some variation by industry. There's folks that hover around the 60% response rate, which it's kind of extraordinary, actually. We don't see quite as high of texting volume, which is why I think some of these industries get a higher response rate. Usually there's a correlation between more texting volume and you tend to see response rate go down a bit when you've got to text more. Hospitals and healthcare, retail, and staffing tend to be fairly heavy users of SMS once they start using it. We do a lot of work with hospitals and healthcare staffing. And I would tell you that, the 50%-ish response rates that you see there is still, it's exceptional. It's really, really good. And so really the response rates there, while there is some variation across industries, by and large, if you just look at that communication channel as a whole, I mean, you're in the near 50 to 60% response rates, which is really phenomenal.
Yeah, and this starts to get to be the fun part here. So this is looking into our texting data. And so the first one that we want to hit, and by the way, Q&A question, guys, or Q&A button at the bottom. Feel free, if you want to ask questions, just even during the webinar, we can hit it. So Martin and I aren't just talking on slide to slide. We would love to make it more conversational. So any questions you have, you can just spit them out now and we can answer them in the flow, or we can cover them at the end, whatever is easier for you guys. But so this slide's talking about linked response rate by message length. So what we see at the bottom here is 0 to 50, that's characters in text. So obviously the shorter, the better here. So keeping it short and sweet is going to get you your best chance at getting a response. But the really interesting jump here, I think, is when you cross over 100 characters, you see basically half of your response rate. So whatever you do, try to keep it below 100. But even 0 to 50 is where you want to be. So yeah, it's an interesting slide, I think.
So this takes a look at response rate by message length across verticals. And I think there's 2 points we want to make here is by and large across verticals, you see better response rates with shorter messages. And for whatever reason, 100 characters appears to be the magic number because there's a significant drop off thereafter. Some industries drop off a little bit faster than others the longer the message gets. We don't have healthcare in here, but I've seen a version of this that has healthcare before. And I would tell you that there's a steeper fall off with healthcare. Since we are talking to a healthcare, there's a very large segment of healthcare staffing professionals here. I would tell you that healthcare staffing looks similar to staffing light industrial, where if you're not writing a short message, you're talking to a nurse who's probably pretty busy with pretty important work. So the tolerance here for longer messages is just, they just don't have the time, frankly. And so it's just a point of emphasis that if you're in healthcare, well, as well as in some other staffing verticals where you've got hourly workers on the go, you got to keep your messages short to maximize your engagement rate.
Yeah, this slide is looking at texting response time. So really, I find it interesting, Monday through Friday, the only one that dips a little bit behind is Friday, probably because people have other things on their mind. And then you see the huge increase in time to respond on the weekends. So really, we see pretty average response times on most weekdays. But I think the bigger thing to take away is that you're getting a response on average in 11 minutes, which is still, I think, what is kind of the key takeaway here. Whereas email, it's hours or days for a response. So I find that an interesting stat too. But yes, Saturday and Sunday, way behind, over 30 minutes both.
So SMS is a near real-time medium for sure. And if you look at not just response time, but messages sent across the week, it's fairly evenly distributed. I mean, you're pushing upwards of about 20% of messages sent and messages received per weekday. I mean, not quite, just a little bit short of that. And then you've got these smaller tails on Saturday and Sunday. So there still is some traffic that goes out on the weekends, but if you look at the weekends as a whole, you're somewhere in the 4% to 5% of total messages, with 95% of your messages occurring Monday through Friday, you know, almost 20% per day.
Yeah, and this is looking at the percent of messages sent by hour of day. So often you would like to ensure that whenever you are sending a campaign or a one-to-one message, you're giving yourself the best opportunity to get a response. So what we see here is most messages sent between the hours of 9 and 12, and then it starts to dip below after there. And I believe the next slide is talking about, you know, responses and average response time.
Yeah, and it's really the mirror image. And it's really the main reason why you see a response time of about 11 minutes. So when you send, you know, let's just say you send a text at 10 right here, you're probably going to, if you get a response back, it's going to come within that hour. And so that's why the curve for messages sent looks almost identical to the curve of messages received, is because everything's pretty much happening within that hour, which is, you know, one of the most powerful things about the SMS medium in general.
Yeah, and before we dive, I know we're going to dive a little bit more into campaign messages, but we also wanted to touch on kind of what we're seeing already in 2023. So big things, but top three, expanded industry usage. So more and more industries are adopting texting. I think recruiting, especially healthcare recruiting, was on the earlier side of that adoption, but now we're starting to see different industries pick up texting for a ton of different use cases. We're seeing campaigns and one-to-one messages increase. So a lot of people are kind of finding that perfect medium of campaign sends matched with one-on-one engagement to get like the best response rates, and then overall reach and conversion. So SMS continues to be the preferred method. We'll talk about recruiting just since we have a ton of healthcare recruiters on this call. So when compared to email, there's just a ton less spam, and the quality of message is higher. So yeah, we're continuing to see more and more reach and higher conversion rates.
And to illustrate that point, this was a study that we did for Staffing World back in, I think it was Q3 of last year. So we found that overall SMS growth was occurring, but if you looked at the two modes of SMS outreach, one being conversational, the other being campaigns, we saw nearly 3x the growth rate in campaign messages being sent out versus conversational messages being sent out. And I think we all thought at the time that it was really a reflection of the labor market. I mean, it was just harder to source candidates. And I think folks just frankly needed to work a bit harder to and reach out a bit more to get candidates in the funnel. I think that's what we saw in the increased usage in campaigns. And so I think the question we all had in our heads was, okay, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Because typically when we see a higher mix of campaigns, we see a dip in response rate. And that's actually what we saw, but I'll hand it off to you to finish the story, Mike.
Yeah. So overall, we're still seeing a growth in engagement, but what we're seeing is a better mixture, I would say, of campaign sends along with one-on-one. So year over year, looking at 2022 compared to the year prior, we do see a 23% growth in overall contact engagement. And so what we think, what we've kind of deduced from this data is that more people are just getting smarter in the way that they use text for outreach to kind of maximize their overall engagement.
So another dimension that we regularly look at in the SMS world is what's the content. So we looked at message length, we looked at mix between conversational and campaigns, and we've looked at response time. Now we're going to look at SMS content. So these are different options, different verticals, and the no represents no image in the text, and yes represents text plus imagery in the text. And what we're trying to understand is that on your first outreach to a candidate or a contact, this is the first message that they're getting. It's the first impression, really, that they're getting from you as a recruiter and you as a firm. Is it good to throw an image in there, or is it good to just use text? And by and large, if you look at staffing, it is good to actually throw in an image of, if you're trying to recruit somebody for a particular job, if you can throw an imagery of the work site or something that relates to the job that can convey some positive imagery about what that job entails. Location's kind of an easy one to envision with pictures. That's going to drive a really favorable response rate to the tune of 3x. In healthcare specifically, imagery on the first send tends not to work so well. It works, it just doesn't work as well as just getting to the point, short and sweet message. It's pretty consistent with the data that we shared earlier that healthcare is pretty particular about brevity and being short. And this data would lead you to believe that if you're in healthcare specifically, either recruiting for a hospital in the talent acquisition department or in working for a recruiting and staffing firm, and you're focused on healthcare, this would say, okay, well, be really careful about the use of imagery here. Because in general, it doesn't play as well and drive as high of engagement on your first send. Maybe subsequent sends once you've gotten the candidate engaged, but not on your first send. Real estate, very similar to non-healthcare staffing. As you might imagine, getting someone to engage on a house is going to be helped by the actual image of the house. And really the same goes for education. And so the content of the message and how you build that, it really differs by vertical, and it needs to be a consideration in what you're doing there.
Yeah, and Martin, along those lines, we got a question on if you're able to send a PDF attachment in a text.
So it's a good question. So with some texting platforms, well, let me take a step back. If you look at the broader industry, the answer is yes, you can send PDFs and images along with your text. Now there's some variation by texting software. I'll only speak for TextUs. With TextUs, you can send an image or a PDF just about anywhere in your conversational text, but you can also send it in your campaigns as well. I know, not every provider or vendor allows you to do that. We do, just because we believe in the power of more of a rich media approach, or giving you the tools to use rich media if your segment or your constituents respond well to it.
Awesome. Cool. And yeah, guys, keep the questions coming in. But a quick summary before we get to the live Q&A. Texting is now business critical. I imagine most of the people on this call are already texting in some sort, whether it's through TextUs or another software or just from their phone to aid in their day-to-day business. And so we're seeing it in more and more industries across different departments, used to communicate and get responses and engagement. I think that there is a ton of new features, specifically with TextUs, that is also aiding to that, like Martin touched on with images, but we've also introduced A/B testing so you can really understand what message resonates with your end user. And then also things like keywords and automation that come into the fold a little bit. So it's not really it's not a nice to have, it's a must have now. And I mean, you see it in the quote here and kind of what Ali was talking about earlier before we hopped on the webinar, where calls aren't answered really anymore. It's more or less a dying art, the art of cold calling, but texts still are on the rise. So that's just a quick summary. And just to touch on another question that came in, yes, this PowerPoint is going to be emailed over as well as a recording of this session. So we'll be sure to send that out once we wrap up here. But yeah, okay, great. Now we have a couple questions funneling in. So within healthcare, obviously this is probably top of mind. Is texting as a whole, Martin, HIPAA compliant?
So SMS, which is really defined and controlled by the carriers, SMS is an unencrypted clear text protocol. So inherently, it is not going to be HIPAA compliant. Now, that being said, software providers like us, we take security measures such as encrypting, authentication, and encrypting within our software. But once you send that message out over the wire on the SMS networks over the carriers, it is unencrypted. So that part of the journey is not going to be HIPAA compliant.
Cool. Another question, are texts logged into LaborEdge?
Great question. I will take that one. So text messages are logged as a journal note into Nexus. It will log who sends the message in general, and it will also log the responses from candidates. It will log just your conversational text message as well as a campaign. That will be logged in a journal note with the timestamp as well as the response from the candidate. It will keep every message in the journal. So recruiters, sales reps, admins, they can go and see what the text conversation may have looked like through a recruiter to a candidate.
Awesome. Okay, another great one here. We have, do you have any standard templates for healthcare recruiters can use to get better responses? What do you recommend recruiters use, emojis or emoticons, or just to keep it short and formal? This is great because I think both Ali and Martin probably have some information here.
Ali, I'm curious, what's been your experience here?
So I actually just had a memory come up on my social media. I think in regards to communicating to healthcare professionals, in regards to jobs and something about their job in general, short and to the point. Healthcare workers are very busy and they don't have time to read through a paragraph when they're getting job details, things like that. So I would say short and to the point, but they also love a little bit of just laughter and knowing that they're talking to a human. So one of my past memories that came up was I sent a super goofy short Valentine's Day joke to almost any candidate I could find within LaborEdge when I was recruiting, and my response rates were amazing. I had over 100 responses just saying Happy Valentine's Day, and that immediately started the conversation. Are you looking for an assignment? what are you doing right now? What can I do to help you? And just something like that. I think if it's job details, straight, simple, to the point, but then just relating to them on a human level, sending them a joke, make them smile. Their jobs are stressful, and that's going to start turning response rates. I would say emojis and stuff like that are fun, but I think just that short, sweet, simple message to them will make them smile and get a response to then start that conversation with them.
Yeah, that's another piece of that question, asking if we have standard templates for healthcare recruiters. We do. So what I'm going to do here is actually send a link to one thing TextUs does really well is create a ton of content because we have so much useful data and also just industry knowledge that we can create templates and guides. So that link right there is filtering out all of our healthcare specific content. And then I'll go ahead and follow up with a second link that you should see in the chat, which is going to be the exact texting templates page for everyone there. So great question. Thanks for asking. All right, next question we have here. Do candidates have to opt into messages to get added to a campaign?
By and large, that's best practice. Yeah, I mean, you do want people opting in. Now, this is a layered question. Is it legal for you to do so in terms of just letting folks know about a job? Legally, as far as we can tell, you don't need an opt-in there, but practically speaking, and by the way, I'm not a lawyer, so don't count on me for legal advice, but based on our research, it would lead us to believe that's the case. But practically speaking, the mobile carriers won't allow you to do it. So best practice here, per CTIA guidelines, get an opt-in, reach out to people over SMS who have opted in, and you're going to get the best results that way. So if they've opted out in the past, and then they opt in the future, which I think all of us do. I do it like it's going out of style. So the answer is yes. If they opt out and then opt back in, you can send them a text again, just as long as you've got that re-opt-in, if you will. Is there an opt-out option for SMS, and will this be recorded in LaborEdge? Short answer, yes. Is there a max number of outreach that can be in a campaign? That's a good question. I don't know that off the top of my head. I imagine the number can't be infinity. I mean, there's got to be a limit somewhere. I just don't know where that line is. It's a lot. How's that?
Yeah, it's high. Yeah.
Very high.
And Allie, you were providing some color when you were a recruiter that you were kind of blasting a ton out. Just curious, like overall, like with your use of TextUs, were you seeing better response rates when you were kind of like blasting out to a huge list, or would you see better response rates when you're kind of going after, that more targeted, smaller list?
So it really depended on what I was going to include in my campaign. When I would do just short and sweet, like a Valentine's Day message or any type of holiday that had nothing to do with a job, I would blast out to anybody and everybody, and I would get a pretty good response rate. For that one Valentine's Day message, like I said, I got over 100 people responding back to me. But in regards to job details, things like that, trying to get someone hooked on a contract that I need to staff immediately, I would always try to keep my campaigns for that one job specifically. I would do about 100 an hour, 100 different candidates, and I would see maybe not as much as my Valentine's Day blast, but I would get at least out of that 100, 25 to 50 responses within the next couple of hours. And I would just continuously do that. I would say when you do a job specific, always keep the campaign to that either specialty or that area of work for that job. I found that I have tested just sending out a job to any type of specialty within the healthcare field to see if I got more responses, but I actually didn't. I was hoping maybe I would get, oh, that's not my job, my specialty anymore, but I didn't get a lot of response from that. So targeting the specialty or the area of work that I'm trying to staff for in my campaign list was what I found more beneficial.
It's great insight. Okay, looks like there's another question here. Is there a way to remove phone numbers that are landlines for communication within TextUs?
Really glad Mr. Anonymous asked this question. For the reason being that landlines, texting to landlines that have not been SMS enabled is far and away the biggest reason for failure rates when you're sending out a campaign or any message. And it's also one of the fastest ways to get you in trouble with the carriers. So if you're sending out large campaigns and the contacts that you're sending out to, there are a lot of landlines that will reject SMS messages. It's one of the things that the mobile carriers will look at. And if you have a high bounce rate on that, you could lose your SMS sending privileges. So we recognize at TextUs that's just, it's a very hard thing to know. And so we actually will do a lookup in our software, and we will filter out landlines that can't receive a text as a way of just ensuring that your message sends have the highest chance of actually landing somewhere. And you know, we do that because we not only want you to reach more, but we also we pay attention to quality as well. We actually want the deliverability to be high, and of course we don't want you to get in trouble either. So there are softwares out there that don't do that, and there's software that does do that. We're one of them.
That's great. Yeah, I want to be mindful of time here. So it's coming up 10:40 here in Denver. So we can leave it open maybe for another minute, see if any more questions come in. But yeah, let's do that. And then if no other questions come in, what we're going to do after we wrap up this webinar, we'll go ahead and send an email to all registrants with this recording, as well as the deck, so you guys can share that internally. And then that usually comes within a couple hours after we wrap it up. So yeah, if there's not any other questions, we'll go ahead and call it there. Really appreciate everyone's time. Allie, thank you so much for helping us run it. And yeah, if anybody has any other questions about the data that was touched on here within TextUs, you can send any email to marketing@textus.com or Martin's email or myself, and we'll make sure it gets to the right person. But other than that, thanks everyone for your time.
Yep. Thank you, Allie and Labor Edge.
Of course. Thank you guys. I had a great time.
Awesome. Great. Well, have a great one, y'all.
Bye, everybody.